The announcement that Burkina Faso, a landlocked West African nation often overlooked in global economic debates, has signed a massive $2.6 billion soybean deal with Saudi Arabia has sent ripples across the international stage. For decades, the economic fortunes of Burkina Faso have been tied to cotton and gold, with much of its agricultural potential underutilized. Now, in a bold and unprecedented move, the country has not only diversified its agricultural strategy, but also entered into an agreement that reshapes both its domestic economy and its global partnerships. What might appear at first as a simple trade deal is, in fact, a geopolitical turning point, a development that has implications not just for Africa and the Middle East, but for the future balance of power in food security, trade, and global diplomacy. Soybeans are more than just another agricultural product. They are a foundation of global food chains, an essential source of protein for human consumption and animal feed, and increasingly, a strategic commodity for biofuel production. Over the past 2 decades, countries such as the United States, Brazil, and Argentina have dominated soybean production and export, shaping international markets and policies. For Saudi Arabia, a nation with limited arable land and deep dependence on food imports, securing reliable supplies of soybean is not only an economic necessity, but a national security concern. For Burkina Faso, a nation striving for development, sovereignty, and diversification, the ability to meet that demand represents an opportunity to reposition itself within global trade networks and break free from the cycles of dependency that have plagued its history. The magnitude of this deal cannot be understated. Valued at $2.6 billion, it represents one of the largest agricultural agreements ever signed by Burkina Faso. For context, the country's entire GDP hovers around $20 billion, meaning that this single agreement amounts to more than 10% of its annual output. Such a figure is transformative, not only in financial terms, but in the message it sends to the world. A country once seen as vulnerable, reliant on aid, and politically unstable is now emerging as a central player in the strategic calculus of nations like Saudi Arabia. In a global system where food security has become as important as energy security, Burkina Faso is stepping into a role it has never played before. The backstory of this deal is equally important. In recent years, under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso has been pursuing policies that emphasize sovereignty, resource control, and agricultural development. This comes against a backdrop of tensions with traditional Western partners and a shift towards building stronger ties with non-Western powers, including Russia, China, Turkey, and now Saudi Arabia. For Saudi Arabia, the partnership fits into a broader strategy of diversifying its food sources, investing in agricultural lands abroad, and reducing vulnerability to global supply chain disruptions. The Russia-Ukraine war highlighted how fragile food systems can be, as grain shortages and price spikes rattled countries worldwide. In this context, Riyadh views direct partnerships with African nations as a way of bypassing global volatility, ensuring direct access to food supplies, and deepening ties with a continent that is increasingly important in global geopolitics. From an agricultural perspective, the deal represents a paradigm shift for Burkina Faso. Soybeans are not traditionally one of the country's dominant crops. Cotton has long been the cash crop of choice, with gold serving as the other pillar of its economy. By moving into soybean production at such a scale, the country is signaling a commitment to agricultural modernization, irrigation expansion, and export-oriented farming. Experts believe that part of the deal includes Saudi investment in infrastructure, storage facilities, and logistics, ensuring that the soybeans can be transported from Burkina Faso's fields to ports in neighboring countries like Ghana, Ivory Coast, and Togo before being shipped to Saudi Arabia. This means the deal is not simply about soybeans, it is about roads, railways, silos, and shipping agreements. In other words, it is about long-term structural transformation. The global shock around this deal also stems from the broader economic narrative it disrupts. For decades, Africa has been seen largely as an importer of food, heavily reliant on aid and vulnerable to price shocks. By becoming an exporter of strategic crops like soybeans, Burkina Faso is challenging this perception. It is saying to the world that Africa is not merely a passive consumer in global trade, but can be an active, strategic producer. This challenges the dominance of traditional exporters like the U.S. and Brazil, and introduces new competition into the market. Even more significantly, it underscores the emergence of South-South cooperation, where developing nations partner directly with one another, bypassing the traditional power brokers of global trade. The political dimensions of this deal are equally significant. For Saudi Arabia, partnering with Burkina Faso sends a message to both allies and rivals. To Western powers, it signals that Riyadh will not be bound solely by U.S. or European supply chains and can strike deals wherever its interests are best served. To African nations, it shows that Saudi Arabia sees Africa not merely as a source of labor or minerals, but as a key agricultural partner. This aligns with Riyadh's broader Vision 2030, which aims to diversify its economy, strengthen global partnerships, and reduce dependency on oil revenues. For Burkina Faso, the message is one of sovereignty. By forging a deal of this magnitude with Saudi Arabia, Traoré is making it clear that his nation will not be dictated to by traditional powers and is capable of creating new alliances that reflect its own strategic interests. The reactions from global actors have been telling. Western media outlets have expressed skepticism, raising questions about Burkina Faso's ability to deliver at scale, pointing to logistical challenges, political instability, and regional security threats from militant groups. Yet behind this skepticism lies a deeper concern. If Burkina Faso succeeds, it could inspire other African nations to pursue similar deals, potentially shifting global trade dynamics. Countries like Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Sudan, with vast agricultural lands, could follow suit, striking direct agreements with Middle Eastern or Asian partners. This would reduce Western leverage and further the trend of a multipolar world order where economic alliances are increasingly decentralized. The economic transformation for Burkina Faso could be profound. A $2.6 billion deal does not only bring foreign exchange reserves, but also creates jobs, incentivizes farmers, and encourages investment in technology. Agricultural modernization requires mechanization, improved seed varieties, and training for farmers. It also requires investment in irrigation to mitigate the risks of climate change and erratic rainfall patterns. If properly managed, this deal could trigger a ripple effect across the economy, stimulating not only agriculture, but also transportation, manufacturing, and services. Critics caution, however, that mismanagement, corruption, or over-reliance on a single commodity could undermine these gains. For this reason, transparency and strong institutions will be crucial in ensuring that the benefits are widely shared among Burkinabe citizens. From a cultural perspective, the deal also raises important questions. Soybeans are not a traditionally staple in Burkina Faso's diet, which relies more heavily on millet, sorghum, and maize. Large-scale soybean production for export could create tensions between export crops and food crops, raising concerns about food sovereignty. Some activists argue that focusing on export crops risks repeating the mistakes of colonial agricultural policies where African nations were forced to grow commodities for European markets at the expense of local food security. Supporters of the deal, however, counter that the financial windfall from soybean exports could strengthen the country's ability to invest in local food systems, making the overall effect positive. The geopolitical implications extend far beyond West Africa. This deal represents a shift in the axis of global trade, with Africa and the Middle East forging a direct agricultural partnership. Historically, such partnerships have been rare, with Africa often serving as a supplier of raw materials while importing food from Europe or America. By changing this dynamic, Burkina Faso and Saudi Arabia are signaling that new patterns of cooperation are emerging. For other Middle Eastern nations, this could serve as a model. Countries like the UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait, which face similar food security challenges, may begin striking similar deals, further integrating Africa into the heart of global food systems. The shock value of this deal also lies in its symbolism. At a time when narratives about Africa often revolve around poverty, instability, and conflict, the image of a small West African nation striking a multi-billion-dollar agreement with one of the richest nations in the world is a powerful counter-narrative. It suggests that Africa is not merely the object of international charity, but an active agent shaping its own destiny. It also underscores the fact that African nations are beginning to realize the value of their agricultural and natural resources, leveraging them not just for survival, but for strategic advantage. International investors are watching closely. If Burkina Faso demonstrates the capacity to fulfill its obligations under this deal, it could open the door to further investments not just in agriculture, but in energy, mining, and infrastructure. It could also inspire regional integration efforts as neighboring countries recognize the potential of pooling resources to attract large-scale foreign deals. Already, there are reports that regional organizations are exploring ways to coordinate agricultural exports, creating African corridors of trade that could rival those of South America or Asia. The domestic political implications for Burkina Faso are also noteworthy. For Ibrahim Traoré, delivering on this deal would strengthen his legitimacy both at home and abroad. It would provide a tangible demonstration that his policies are yielding results, giving him leverage against critics who accuse him of isolating the country from traditional Western partners. At the same time, failure to deliver could expose him to criticism and undermine his credibility. The stakes, therefore, are exceptionally high. At the global level, this deal fits into the broader narrative of shifting power balances. The post-world War II order, dominated by Western powers and their control of global trade, is giving way to a multipolar system where new players emerge. China, India, Russia, and now Africa are asserting themselves in ways that disrupt traditional hierarchies. The Burkina Faso-Saudi Arabia soybean deal may not alter the balance of power overnight, but it is emblematic of the quiet revolution underway in global trade systems. It represents a decentralization of influence, a breaking of old monopolies, and the creation of new alliances that reflect the realities of the 21st century. In analyzing the implications for global soybean markets, one cannot ignore the potential impact on prices and supply chains. If Burkina Faso emerges as a credible supplier, it could ease some of the pressure on global markets, especially as climate change threatens yields in traditional soybean-producing regions. It could also offer Saudi Arabia and other buyers, and once an alternative to reliance on the United States or South America, introducing new competition that could benefit consumers. On the flip side, it could increase land pressures in Burkina Faso, raising environmental concerns about deforestation, water use, and biodiversity loss. The international community will likely respond in varied ways. Western nations may seek to re-engage with Burkina Faso, offering incentives to prevent it from aligning too closely with non-Western partners. Development agencies may increase funding for agricultural projects, hoping to influence how the sector develops. Rival soybean exporters may attempt to undercut prices or secure alternative deals to maintain market share. What is certain is that this agreement has already disrupted established patterns and forced global players to rethink their strategies. Ultimately, the $2.6 billion soybean deal between Burkina Faso and Saudi Arabia is more than a commercial agreement. It is a statement of intent, a declaration that the future of global trade will be shaped not only in Washington, Brussels, or Beijing, but also in Ouagadougou and Riyadh. It represents the intersection of food security, sovereignty, geopolitics, and economic transformation. For Burkina Faso, it is a chance to redefine its place in the world. For Saudi Arabia, it is a step toward greater resilience. For the world at large, it is a reminder that the most profound shifts often come from unexpected places, and that, in the 21st century, no nation, however small, can be ignored in the great game of global economics.